December 17, 1944, Büllingen, Belgium. Snow fell in heavy, wind-blown sheets across the Ardennes hills, muffling the sound of engines and men. Under a pale gray sky, the armored spearhead of Kampfgruppe Peiper rolled into the captured American supply depot, a chaotic sprawl of overturned drums, smashed crates, and scattered boxes marked U.S. Army. The air reeked of gasoline, oil, and cordite. SS Sturmbannführer Joachim Peiper climbed down from his command half-track, boots crunching in the frozen slush. The 29-year-old Waffen-SS officer was the youngest regimental commander in the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, and one of the most feared. He had orders from General Sepp Dietrich himself: drive to the Meuse River at all costs, seize the crossings, and split the Allied line in two. His men had already overrun several American positions in the first 48 hours of the offensive. Here at Büllingen, they found not just prisoners and fuel, but something unexpected: small olive-drab boxes labeled Meal Combat U.S. Army. A German lieutenant tore one open with a knife, lifting out the neatly wrapped contents: a tin of cheese spread, crackers sealed in wax paper, a chocolate bar, chewing gum, instant coffee, and cigarettes, all individually packaged. He whistled low. "Mein Gott," another soldier murmured, turning over a packet of powdered lemonade. "They send this to the front?" Peiper took one of the boxes, weighing it in his gloved hands. Each detail, the printed instructions, the tiny can opener folded under the lid, spoke of something deeper than convenience. It spoke of an enemy that could feed, clothe, and arm millions of men as if by an invisible machine. In his war diary, one officer later wrote, "When we saw the American rations, we knew. No nation that could produce such things in such numbers could be defeated through battle alone." Peiper didn't waste time. He ordered the captured fuel, 50,000 gallons, to be loaded into German vehicles. His column, over 6,000 men strong with nearly 200 armored vehicles, refueled amid the wreckage of the depot. The engines roared back to life, exhaust smoke mixing with the frozen mist. But the euphoria was short-lived. Peiper's adjutant, Hauptsturmbannführer Werner Sternbeck, approached with the latest situation map. The markings were grim. Fuel reserves were already dangerously low again, barely enough to reach the next objective, much less the Meuse. Intelligence claimed there was a massive American depot near Stavelot, over 3 million gallons of fuel stored there. If they could seize it intact, the offensive could continue. Without it, the drive would die in the snow. Peiper nodded once. "Then we go to Stavelot," he said simply. The order rippled through the column. Tanks clanked into line, machine gunners reloaded belts stiff with frost, and infantry checked their weapons under the gray winter light. The snow thickened as they rolled out of Büllingen, heading northwest, deeper into enemy territory. Behind them, the captured American rations lay half buried in snowdrifts, their neat packaging bright against the mud and ice. For a moment, the battlefield seemed to fall silent, as if history itself paused, watching a commander drive towards both glory and disaster, fueled by stolen gasoline and the illusion of control. What Peiper didn't know was that at Stavelot, he would come within 300 yards of salvation and never see it. The snowstorm worsened through the night, coating the Ardennes roads in a thick crust of ice. The German column advanced slowly, headlights dimmed, treads grinding through abandoned villages. The roar of tank engines echoed down narrow streets, bouncing off stone walls and shuttered windows. Civilians huddled in basements, praying the thunder of war would pass them by. At dawn, Peiper's vanguard, the armored spearhead of the Leibstandarte, approached the outskirts of Stavelot. The small Belgian town sat in a valley, its river bridge marking a key crossing toward the Meuse. If the bridge fell, Peiper's tanks could surge westward. If destroyed, the offensive would stall. American engineers had wired the bridge for demolition, waiting for the last of their retreating troops to cross. But confusion reigned. The sudden appearance of German tanks, Panzer IVs and King Tigers, sent the defenders into panic. At 0700 hours, Peiper's forward units, led by the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, stormed the bridge under a shroud of morning mist. Machine guns rattled. Bazooka teams fired from doorways. German grenadiers answered with Panzerfausts. The air filled with the crack of rifles, the clang of ricochets, the smell of cordite and wet stone. Through the chaos, a single King Tiger rumbled forward, its 88mm cannon thundering. The American charges failed to detonate. The bridge held. Stavelot and its crossing was in German hands. Peiper crossed with his command half-track, scanning the narrow streets for signs of the reported fuel depot. His orders were clear: locate the 3 million gallons of gasoline, refuel, and continue the advance. But as his men spread through the town, they found nothing. Warehouses were searched, roadsides combed. Empty garages and cellars were turned inside out. No tanks, no drums, no tankers, nothing resembling a fuel depot. Peiper frowned, tracing the map with a gloved finger. Intelligence had been certain. His adjutant, Sternbeck, double-checked the coordinates. "It should be here," he said, tapping the paper. It was there, just 300 yards away, stacked neatly along the roadside in endless rows of jerrycans, hidden in plain sight. But Peiper never recognized it. He had expected something larger, great steel tanks or fuel trucks, not thousands of small containers covered by snow and tarpaulins. So the column moved on. The depot that could have refueled the entire 6th Panzer Army was left behind, untouched. As they pressed westward toward Trois Ponts, the cost of that mistake grew heavier with every mile. Fuel gauges dropped toward empty. Panzer crews siphoned gasoline from wrecked vehicles, filling canteens and flasks in desperation. By the time Peiper reached Stoumont, his advance had slowed to a crawl. Every movement, every decision now hinged on the contents of a few remaining fuel drums. He had crossed the bridge, yes, but his offensive had already begun to die. That night, as he studied his maps in a dimly lit farmhouse, Peiper listened to the distant hum of American artillery and thought of the K-Rations at Büllingen, the efficiency, the abundance, the machine behind the enemy lines. His own men sat outside, sharing the last of the captured rations by the fire. One SS grenadier bit into a chocolate bar and murmured, "They fight with factories." Peiper said nothing. He knew the truth in those words. By December 19, 1944, Kampfgruppe Peiper was running on fumes, both literally and morally. The Ardennes offensive that had begun with thunder and fire was slowing to a shivering crawl. Ice rimed the edges of helmets, men's breath hung in the air, and the great engines of the Panzerkampfwagen coughed in protest as their tanks idled without fuel. In the narrow, snow-choked streets of Stoumont, Peiper's men fought house to house against the American 119th Infantry Regiment. Mortar shells burst against the slate rooftops, sending showers of stone and ice down onto the German lines. Inside a captured American aid station, once a small country hospital, the SS commander met a new prisoner, Major Hal McCown of the 119th Infantry. McCown, exhausted and mud-streaked, had been captured when his battalion was overrun. Peiper ordered that the American officer be kept under guard but treated decently. "He's an officer," Peiper said flatly to his men. "He'll see how Germans fight." For the next 3 days, McCown saw everything. He watched as Peiper's column shrank into a frozen, starving circle. The grand armored spearhead that had broken through American lines now sat trapped, low on ammunition, surrounded by U.S. armor and artillery, and utterly out of fuel. The Americans had retaken Stavelot and blown the bridge Peiper had crossed. The road behind was gone. Ahead lay only snow, ice, and encirclement. McCown noted the condition of his captors with a soldier's precision. In his later report, he wrote, "Their medical station was primitive, devoid of anesthetics, morphine, or antibiotics. Bandages were washed and reused. The wounded lay in unheated rooms, some dying of exposure rather than their wounds." He saw German medics cutting apart American field dressings to reuse the clean sections. He watched young SS grenadiers tear open American K-Rations with numb fingers, dividing biscuits and chocolate into equal shares. One soldier saved a single coffee packet for Peiper himself, offering it like a medal. Peiper barely touched it. His focus never left the map. "Fuel," he muttered to his staff, voice hoarse. "We cannot move without fuel." Outside, the massive King Tigers sat idle under falling snow, their engines silent, black crosses half buried beneath ice. One tank commander, Obersturmführer Dollinger, reported they had drained their last reserves just to keep the engines from freezing. Others had begun dismantling radios and stoves to siphon what little gasoline remained in the lines. At night, the trapped men listened to the distant rumble of American artillery and the groan of the wind over the valley. Peiper's command post flickered by candlelight, a map spread over a wooden table, a radio hissing with static. McCown would later describe Peiper as disciplined, even polite, but visibly aware his position was hopeless. On December 21st, Peiper summoned his senior officers. They had less than 20 miles of operational range left for tanks weighing 60 tons. Ammunition was nearly exhausted. Radio messages from higher command had ceased. The snow kept falling. Peiper looked at his men, veterans of Kharkov and Kursk, now trapped in a Belgian village by the thing they had once believed they could conquer: logistics. He folded the map and said quietly, "We will hold until we can move, or until none of us can." McCown watched as the German commander walked out into the snow, past the burning hulks of his own vehicles. Somewhere out there, he thought, were 1,000,000 gallons of fuel that might have changed this war, but Peiper had driven right past them. By the morning of December 23, 1944, Peiper's once mighty Kampfgruppe had become a silent graveyard of steel. The snow no longer fell in flakes. It came down in heavy, blinding sheets, coating the Ardennes hills and turning every wreck into a ghostly monument. The German column, encircled and hunted, had fallen back to the village of La Gleize. There, among stone cottages and narrow farm lanes, Peiper gathered what remained of his force, fewer than 800 men, all exhausted, frostbitten, and starving. The rest were dead, wounded, or captured. Every tank in the unit stood immobile. The great Tiger IIs, symbols of the Reich's mechanical might, sat like stranded beasts, their engines dry, their hulls frozen solid. When the last drops of fuel were poured into a single remaining vehicle, it barely managed to turn over before sputtering to silence. Peiper stood in the center of the village, snow swirling around his leather coat. He could hear the distant thump of American artillery edging closer by the hour. His radio officer reported that Allied infantry had sealed every escape route. The 30th Infantry Division was closing from the west. The 82nd Airborne had cut the northern roads. There was no more fuel, no more hope of relief. That night, Major Hal McCown, still a prisoner but treated as an observer, was brought to Peiper's command post. The SS commander, his face gaunt and pale from sleeplessness, poured the American a small tin cup of black coffee, the last of the captured K-Rations. "Your army fights well," Peiper said quietly, in near-perfect English. "You are well fed, well equipped. We have courage, but courage burns like fuel. It does not last forever." McCown nodded. "Neither does gasoline," he replied. Peiper allowed himself a faint, humorless smile. Outside, the SS men prepared for the end. They stripped weapons for parts, burned documents, and destroyed what they could not carry. The snowstorm muffled everything: the crack of rifles, the rumble of distant engines, the low prayers of soldiers who had stopped believing in victory. By the morning of December 24th, Peiper gave the order: abandon all heavy equipment, move on foot. 7 Tiger tanks, 50 Panzer IVs and half-tracks, and over 100 support vehicles were left behind. each one a monument to failure by fuel. The man packed what little ammunition and rations remained and began the march eastward, slipping silently through forests and over frozen streams. The once proud armored spearhead that had promised to reach the Meuse was now a column of weary men trudging through the snow, hunted by Allied patrols. The SS ran without engines, their boots sinking deep into the drifts, each step marked by exhaustion and disbelief. When McCown was finally liberated days later, he told his superiors exactly what he had witnessed. They fought with discipline and conviction, but they were beaten not by our bullets, nor by our numbers, but by logistics. Their engines froze, their wounded starved, their courage wasted away in the cold. At La Gleize, American troops found the burned-out hulks of Peiper's armor, still bearing blackened iron crosses, their fuel tanks bone dry. Inside one destroyed Tiger, a half-empty K-ration tin still sat on the driver's seat, an eerie symbol of what the Germans had tried to steal but could never produce. Peiper and a remnant of his men escaped through the woods that night, slipping through enemy lines to rejoin the shattered remnants of the 1st SS Panzer Division. Behind them, the Ardennes fell silent again. The great German gamble in the West had ended, not with surrender, but with starvation. And for those who had opened an American K-ration in the snow at Büllingen, the realization had already come days earlier. The war was no longer about who fought hardest, but who could keep fighting longest.